We have a treat in store for us this afternoon, but we are a group of women and we adapt. So we have made a number of adaptations to the program, adaptations, I should say. The first is a little bit of sad news in that our last year's laureate, Jamila Afghani, was actually en route to the airport yesterday and was in a minor car accident, and so was taken to hospital. So she's not here. She did, however, send us her remarks, so I'm going to read them in a moment. And then we're going to have a discussion amongst a wonderful set of panelists, and we have recruited a wonderful substitute for Jamila, who is Marguerite Barankitse, who was the very first laureate, and she from Burundi. So she has very kindly, at the 11th and a half hour, agreed to join our panel. And in addition, I'm joined by Anna Spain Bradley, who is Professor at Law at UCLA and Special Advisor to the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost on Strategic Planning and Values. We're also joined by Shantha Sinha, who is the Aurora Prize Expert Panel Member and founder of the MV Foundation, Professor of Political Science at the University of Hyderabad. And those of you who know about the MV Foundation will know this is a foundation that brings children out of work and into school. And last, but by no means least, we have Wendy Kopp, who is the CEO and the co-founder of Teach for All, which is a global network trying to ensure the best possible education for the maximum number of students, built on the great success of Teach for America. So before we have a conversation, let me just say one or two words about the importance of the issue. It hardly needs to be stressed, the importance of the issue. I like to say that I went away to university shortly after my 17th birthday, and I only left last year. So I believe passionately in the power of education to transform lives, and like many people in this room, I've been the beneficiary of an education generously funded by others. But not everybody is so lucky. 750 million people in the world today cannot read or write. 3/4 of those are female. As Larry Summers said back in the 1990s, and it is as true now as it was then, there is no better return on investment in the developing world than investment in the education of women. We know that for every additional year of education a mother receives, there's a 3% increase in the longevity of children, or a 3% decrease in the mortality of children under the age of 5. So nothing could be more important than education. But it's not just an issue in the developing world. Even in this country, a country of this extraordinary wealth, 15% of children do not have access to the internet from their homes. How can they possibly hope to thrive in an education system where that is a requirement? But we're going to be exploring these and many other topics with our fabulous group of colleagues here. But before we begin, let me just read Jamila's remarks that she would have given had she been able to make it. The daily reality for Afghan girls and women has become bleak and disheartening under the Taliban regime. It's not just that their opportunities have been cut off, it's the profound sense of worthlessness and loss of purpose that now defines their everyday experience. The closing of secondary schools for girls and the banning of women from universities and teaching positions mark a drastic setback in the struggle for gender equality in Afghanistan. This restrictive interpretation of Islamic law has confined women to the margins, leaving them with few pathways for personal and professional growth. The emotional toil of living with limited prospects and an uncertain future cannot be overstated. The impact of these restrictions goes beyond individual hardship. It is a systemic blow to Afghanistan's social and economic development. Education is foundational to building a society where everyone can contribute and where everyone can benefit from collective progress. When half of the population is excluded from education, the entire nation suffers. The international community and human rights groups have strongly criticized the Taliban's policies, urging them to grant girls and women their fundamental rights. Yet the Taliban's intransigence persists. To combat this injustice, Global solidarity is crucial. We must continue to pressure regimes that discriminate against women and girls, insisting on equality and inclusion. Gender apartheid in any form and in any country must be met with zero tolerance. We all have a role in ensuring that women and girls are treated as equal members of society, deserving of the same opportunities and freedoms everywhere in the world. So I hope that Jamila might be watching, so please show your appreciation for her remarks. So with that, I just thought we'd have a conversation, and I'd invite each of the panelists to respond to those remarks and tell us about their work. Wendy, could we start with you?
Absolutely. Well, it's hard to follow those just very important remarks. As you heard, I am part of a network of organizations in 62 countries that are brought together by a common purpose and a shared vision to essentially develop what we call collective leadership to ensure all kids fulfill their potential and gain access to the kind of education that enables them to shape a better future for themselves and for all of us. As Jamila said so beautifully, we believe as educators we have the greatest role to play in reshaping the world, right? Like what happens in our classrooms today will predict the kind of world we have tomorrow. And I guess what we've seen all over the world, I mean, it's striking to listen to her bring to life the reality for secondary girls in Afghanistan. I have to say that from what we've seen in marginalized communities all over the world, that reality exists as well for many, many. I was just in Niger, which is one of the highest poverty countries in the world. 99% of 10-year-olds cannot read a basic sentence or do a simple math equation in Niger. But then I went on to Liberia, where it's something like 92%. 92% of 10-year-olds cannot read a simple sentence. A few weeks ago, I was in Sierra Leone, where the country's president has been lauded, as he should be, for his commitment to education. He's put a significant portion of their budget into education. And yet when you go into the rural schools and see what's happening, the kids are in schools, but they are not learning. And again, 92% of kids in Sierra Leone, by the time they're 10, cannot read a simple sentence. And, we could go around the world and, in marginalized communities all around the world, the reality is we're not enabling kids to gain basic foundational learning, let alone develop as well the sense of agency, the awareness, the connectedness to people and planet, the sense of well-being, the kind of holistic student development that will be crucial if we're going to realize all of our aspirations for peace and sustainability and justice. What we've seen through our work, however, on the more hopeful side, is that with enough leadership in any given place, we can change this, and we can ensure that all kids have the chance to attain an excellent education. We have come to speak about collective leadership, and by that we mean, ultimately we've seen that in any community where there are enough people working throughout the ecosystem around kids, as teachers, as school leaders, as government administrators, as policymakers, as social innovators and advocates pushing on the system, like where you can get to a place where there's enough of a critical mass of people who are all on a mission to ensure that all kids thrive, you essentially start moving the system forward. And what we would say is that we've seen that in education we tend to approach things, we wish it was easier than that. Like maybe there's like a solution. Maybe we could change the curriculum or pursue these very technical practices. And those are important, right? We need standards and aligned assessments and curriculum and teacher training and all of the technical practices of education. But that alone, without intentional cultivation of the local leadership we need, then you don't have all those technical practices done with intention. And so this is an effort to develop the future leadership to say, we are going to reshape the world through education. So back to Afghanistan, I spoke this morning knowing that I would follow Jamila's comments with the founder of Teach for Afghanistan, which each year is enlisting some of the most educated graduates in Afghanistan to initially commit 2 years to teach in marginalized communities. And with the government change and all the circumstances we heard, very sadly, those teachers are now working in communities at the primary level. But they're also keeping the girls learning in their homes at the secondary level. And I think that example is just illustrative of the fact that, I mean, we need all the outrage we can muster, and we need the UN groups, and we need lots of change at that level. And at the same time, we need to cultivate the local people who are in communities, who have trusting relationships with kids and families, and can actually ultimately affect the actual changes, not only in policy, but in practice and culture that we need to see. And I'll wrap this up, but just to say, even beyond Afghanistan, that's what we see. Like in Sierra Leone, the president is committed. He's appointed an education minister who is committed, but ultimately it takes more than top down, right? Like we need the troops, like the ground troops, like people throughout that system who are on an absolute mission to live into those priorities that they've set. And so that's what this effort is about, is to say we're going to build a movement among the rising generation of educated young people to say we're going to reshape the future through education, through ensuring that all kids have the kind of education that they deserve.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Well, Shantha, you work with local communities in India.
Right.
Perhaps you could respond.
Thank you. First of all, I think Jamila's statement has been so very moving, and it seems such a huge challenge for girls in Afghanistan. Fortunately, in India, we have our children don't encounter that kind of reality, except, of course, in small pockets of armed conflict. There is this kind of challenge. Now, I think I will just tell you about the girls we are working with and the larger framework in which we are working. When we started our work, I represent an organization called MV Foundation. When we started our work, we thought we should work on child slavery and children who are bonded laborers. It is a deeply contentious issue, and it disturbed the caste relations. You know, there is most of the children who are under slavery are from the untouchable community, the most marginalized, the Dalit community. And it, in fact, triggered a lot of reaction, political reaction, and violence also in the process. So we had to work through that. And when we rescued these children, we found another set of children joined slavery. So we had to think of a strategy that would prevent child slavery for good. So that's when we said we'll have to work with all children in the village and not just children who are in a condition of bondage. When we did that, we found that the most enslaved were the girls. They were so invisible. They did all the domestic work. There was gender discrimination, there was sexual abuse, incest within the family, and they were not talked about at all as child labor, although the entire family rested on the work that they did. So we came up with the definition that all children out of school are child labor. And that, in fact, helped us take the program forward. So when we did that, we had come up with an idea of preventing child labor once and for all. When we withdrew these children from work, they were about 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old, and the schools would not accept them. So and also there was social tension. So we had to put them in a shelter. We found within a year, they were ready for 6th and 7th grade. That's how the program for bridge courses began. So we said for an older child who has never been to school, there has to be a bridge course and then sent to school. We worked only with the public schools, and we decided it is a right, it is a state obligation. We cannot set up our own schools and parallel system, and we have to ensure that children's rights are actually protected. So ours was completely a rights-based agenda, and as a rights-based agenda, it had the element of universality. We would deal with all children. So we developed an area-based approach. In a particular area, say there are 10 villages, and there are about 6,000 children in the 1,000 children in the 10 villages. We would cover every child in school and out of school. In our work, we said that every child in school is a potential child labor. It's like winning a lottery ticket. You don't know how many children will complete class 5, how many children will complete class 10. So we had to track every child in school and make sure that the child does not drop out, and every child out of school, and make sure that they come into school. This we did through a process of community mobilization and building a social norm, building a norm that no child must work, every child must be in school. In fact, talking about being shocked that a child is not in school, outraged that a child is not in school. This establishing of social norm was the key to our program. A social norm was created in the process of resolving conflicts. I must tell you, education is it is an intensely political issue. It's not a charity issue. Getting every child to school is resolving conflicts. If we brought 1 million children back into the school system, we resolved 1 million conflicts. And the resolution of conflict is done by our local volunteers. I'm sure all of us who have worked with the communities, we know what the work of the volunteers are. They're mad. They think children all the time. Until they succeed and take an issue to the logical end, they're not going to keep quiet. So this is an area-based approach, and after, say, about 4 or 5 years, we were able to declare that area as child labor-free zone, and we follow up with children till they finish 10th grade. What is important here is that every time we rescue a child, the child is exercising agency. If the child didn't have the courage to fight, there's nothing that you and me can do. Especially for girls, if they have come up to the 10th grade, they've fought every day of their lives to come to a 10th grade. And that we have witnessed during COVID, that many of them defied child marriages, many of them defied trafficking, many of them worked for the families, and when the schools reopened, more than the boys, it was the girls who ran to school because they just didn't want gender discrimination. They just didn't want patriarchy, and we were there to support them. I won't go more, but I think what is important is to understand that it is a political issue. It's of course ethical, it is moral, it is for equality, but it is a deeply contentious political issue. Secondly, it is easier to convince the community. It's far more difficult to convince the authorities up that the poor are ready for education. They're forever giving excuses that they need the income of families. They're so poor they have to work. They don't have to work, they have a right. They have a right to education, and you have a business of investing in education to see that the children enjoy their right. So we have to continuously argue with the authorities, and I was sharing with Annie that there is a dearth of education because there is no elite consensus in my country and perhaps world over that every child must be in school. We have to work on the ground, but much more on the stubborn mindsets of those in authority and power in corporates everywhere, that poor children need education, equal education, and they will start learning if there is equity in education. Talking about learning loss without talking about equity, I think is a peril to democracy in education and education as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your work is so inspirational. And I know you've thought about these issues for a long time.
Well, just to say welcome everyone and thank you for showing up today and being a part of this. How many of you, just by show of hands, know someone who's involved in education, either as a learner or as an educator? well, all of us in some point have been a learner. And I think when we think about education, we can go all the way back in anthropology just to this core innate need that every human being has to satisfy our curiosity. Curiosity drives the desire to learn, and that is something that kind of landed us in this human rights space of thinking about the right to education. So I just want to pull back a little bit in thinking about the overall legal framework under international human rights law for where the right to education came from, what it means, and 2 or 3 critical challenges or debates about the right to education right now. In the 1920s, as we were, as a world, thinking about human rights in the interwar period, there was an early document called the Declaration of the Rights of the Child from 1926, and it was drafted by a woman named Eglantine Jebb. That went on to become the foundational document for what would become the treaty, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which came in 1989, much later. But as early as 1948, all nations agreed, at least in principle, to the right to education as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And Article 26 of that provides that, quote, everyone has a right to education. Now, in legal thinking, the minute you establish a right, there's always a corresponding obligation. Who is responsible for making sure that everyone has a right to education? So in later treaty law, and there's been considered 9 foundational human rights treaties. Not all nations have signed them or adopted them, but the Convention of the Rights of the Child has been probably the most widely adopted of these treaties. And it basically provides the legal right that children are entitled to free and quality primary education. The movement in the last couple decades has been to add strength to this through a 4th optional protocol. And that protocol would establish that then children are also entitled to 1 year of free and quality pre-primary education and 1 year of free and quality secondary education. But as you can hear from my distinguished panelists, we haven't even gotten the core part established universally, and so there's a lot of struggle there. I think when we think about this right and the corresponding obligation, we also need to think of beyond legal thinking to political thinking. And as Shani just mentioned, receiving an education is a political act. Providing an education is a political act. We are in a state in the world today where having a giant part of your population be educated, and we should put that in brackets because it means a lot of different things, creates an activism among citizens that many in governments and many in other leadership roles may or may not enjoy. So the 3 critical things for us to kind of think about as we engage in the right to education. One is the principle of subsidiarity, and in human rights world, when we teach human rights, we often think about this idea of universal human rights versus cultural relativism. Subsidiarity is a basic principle that says people closest to experiencing a harm should be the very people centered at creating the solutions to that harm. And we have many activists and distinguished guests today who have lived that and have led that. One example, when Russia was called upon to embrace the Convention of the Rights of the Child, it faced a challenge with people who lived in the very north, who were reindeer herders, who as families would move with the herd, and who were forced to send their children away from the family so they could be in a city, so they could receive an education. Some people argued this is right, some people argued this is wrong. This is the question of, while we agree on a right to education, how it is done, who gets to decide, is a really critical question in many, many parts of the world. The second part comes closer to home, and this is, well, I'll wrap it up here. When we have education that is teaching young people critical histories, you've heard a lot about critical legal history, critical race history, critical histories. We are teaching people about the fullness of a historical record, to consider what has been told through new perspectives. what happened in the past? Who told those stories? How do we understand them today through new lenses? And when we do that, we are now engaging in education that is becoming a political act, and that has become something that political operations around the world and closer here at home in the United States seek to have control over. So as somebody who has been a professor for 20 years, I recently stepped down as vice chancellor here at UCLA. I worked to lead our civil rights division and our equity, diversity, inclusion division. The backlash against thinking about diversity, about equity, and about inclusion for all has been politicalized. For people who are doing that work, it always tries to center the dignity of the human being. And we are seeing across campuses and colleges, high schools too, here in the US and many other places, young people raising their voices to decry what they see as a wrong, what they see as a human rights abuse. Right or wrong, and the details, and we've got experts here today who can take us through the elements of international crime and discuss all of those things. When, my opinion, not anyone else's, when a government, those in power, go after the youth with violence, with force, we have lost. And we have to find a third way. The campus we're on is experiencing a lot of trauma from recent events in the last week and a half. The people who work here, who have been having to come to campus and do jobs, UCLA's Los Angeles' fourth largest employer, are experiencing this as well. The students are experiencing this as well. And I think it's beholden on places of education to stand up against oppression wherever it is without becoming the oppressor itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Marguerite, let's turn to you now. And please tell us your story. It's such an inspiring one.
They asked me to tell them my story. It's strange because I grew up in a very Christian family, and I believe that when I went at school, I believe that we are one human family, we can share. And when I was a teenager, the war broke in my country between the two ethnic groups. And for me, my mom had never said about my ethnic group, because she said, you are a child of God, or everybody is your brother and sister. But I was in a classroom in a Catholic school, and then I saw militaries coming in our classroom and took our teacher. I look around, I see no reaction. I can't stop. I went and I followed the militaries, crying and said, why you took our teacher? Everybody look at me as a crazy, and I don't understand. I was 16. Then I went to see our headmistress. She was a nun. I asked, but why you don't react? Why they took our teacher? She was a Belgian nun, and I can understand. I said, okay, perhaps she can't understand our ethnic problems. Then I went to see other teachers. Why you don't defend this? Then I abandoned the school. In holidays, I lost my father when I was only 5 years old. My mom was very young. She was only 24 years when my father died. I said, Mom, but why you send me at school where they have no human values? If I must become a doctor, medical doctor or scientist, without those values, I am nothing. Then I will not return at school. I will stay near you because I see that you give me, you are doctor in theology, in sociology, pedagogy, but at school, we only repeat science. We don't learn to become human being. We became, of course, we can have diploma. Mom, then she said to me, how you will transform this world without education? Then she went because I live in a rural place, we have no electricity, but she went, we have a sort of, I don't know how to say it in English, but we put oil and then a lamp, yes. And she said, then you can return at school. You will not change many things. But if you are good educated, you can be this candor, and you can, push the darkness. Then I said, then I change. I want to become a teacher. Then I will teach my children to become a light in those darkness for our African Great Lakes region. I want to do that because it's not possible. Since 1959, in our Great Lakes region in Africa, it's always war. Tutsi Rwandese came in our country, in Burundi. And after 1965, Hutu went in Congo, in Tanzania, in Rwanda. Then I began to teach the truth, the history of our Great Lakes region. Then the government put me out there, said, you are bad teacher. And I don't know how to translate in English. You can translate. They wrote to my bulletin que j'organise une désobéissance civile.
You're teaching disobedience?
Yeah.
Disobedience.
Une désobéissance civile généralisée et irréversible.
Generalized civil disobedience and irreversible.
But I said, I will never give up. Then I left the school and I want to create a new generation. But I said, how I can do that? Then I decided, of course, to go to, I went in France to study, and after I went also in Switzerland, I said, if in my country we have so many young, I can raise those young, a good education with good human values. After I went to live in my village, I didn't go in town, in my
Birthplace?
born village, and I began to create, I adopted kids, Hutu and Tutsi together, to show to my community that's the problem. It's not ethnic. It's bad governance, bad leaders, politicians who are not good educated, because they are all those dictator, tyrannic, because they have diploma, but they lost this education in compassion, in democracy. But unfortunately, the war broke in my village. They came in my village because we were on Tutsi. The Hutu came and they killed all my family. I lost 60 members of my family. When they arrived to my home, because I have Hutu and Tutsi kids, they said, you are crazy. We will not kill you. You can. Then I left my village. I have nowhere to go with 7 kids that I have. But I think, oh, I can go to the bishop house. There, he was a Catholic bishop. Then I called all the people. I said, come, we are going to protect each other. If Hutu come, you protect us. And if Tutsi come, I will protect you. Unfortunately, the Tutsi military came to revenge, and they tired me, and they killed 70 people in front of me. Oh. But I finally, I give the money. I said, if I have children, I can continue to raise them, to educate them. They will be a new generation who will break this violence in our Great Lakes region. Unfortunately, I was in the street, but I don't want to give up. And then I found journalists help me. I must make short. And then I took those kids. I said, as Mandela said, if the education is the most powerful weapon to transform the world in paradise. I said, I have young people. Then I can raise them. Then finally, I send them in universities. They became engineers. They became medical. So again, in 2015, I was obliged because the government became jealous of my success because I built even university, primary school, medical school. And then in 2015, the government, again, the young people went to protest against the president, and they began to kill my children because they were the first to say, no, we want peace. And then I was obliged to flee. But I said, okay. I arrived in Luxembourg. I asked only a travel document. I said, I will return in this Great Lakes region. I am convinced that I can change those wars in peace, in raise those kids with peace, with compassion, integrity. Then I succeed because I am here. I am the first laureate of Aurora Prize. In my country, they condemn me. I am a perpetual condemned in my country. But the same year, Aurora Prize gave me to be awakening humanity. I am here to tell you, I succeed in the refugee camp. I send with the money they give me because I am convinced that if we have good educated young people with good human values, we change the world. Now I am in refugee camp. I transform the refugee camp in a city. We put the school online. We put computers. We rebuilt the refugee camp. We plan, and now my colleague, 80% of my colleagues are former kids of Maison Shalom. Don't never give up. I am so happy to share this story because everybody wrote crazy woman of Burundi. I accept, and I wish that you can have this craziness, then you will change the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a French English.
That was a wonderful manifestation of Aurora. What an extraordinary story. We only have 20 minutes left, and I do want to turn to the audience, but would like to give our panelists a chance to respond to anything they've heard. Wendy, I know you are under a time constraint.
I will do that because I have to run off after this to catch a flight. So I'll jump in and just say, can you imagine if even just a fraction of the world's leaders had your passionate belief in the importance of education? Like, we're in the midst of an absolute learning crisis. I mean, I think we all know, like, you think about the Afghanistans of the world, and it's such an extraordinary crisis for girls. But the fact is, we have a crisis that is worldwide. There was just a huge educational research project that looked at 50 years of educational outcomes in all the low and low to middle income countries in the world. It's called the RISE project out of Oxford's Blavatnik School. And it showed that educational outcomes have actually gone down in the last 50 years. The PISA results just came out, this assessment, the international assessment of 15-year-olds that looks at problem-solving, critical thinking skills and measures of student well-being. We're in a 10-year decline. That started before COVID. So, you know, you talk to Andreas Schleicher, who heads up the PISA and probably knows more than anyone about education. And what he says is, when you look at the outliers, the Vietnams of the world, where the outcomes are actually getting better, like, always there's a collective realization in those places that their fates depend on education. And this is just a fact, right? Like, we know that our fates depend on how the next generation is educated. But for some reason, we're not acting on that. So somehow we just need to reset in terms of the priority that we put on education. And the second thought I have is that, you know, we tend to wait for governments to solve the problems of education. And we need governments. We absolutely need governments. But what I think you can hear in your example, you know, in the example of Teach for Afghanistan, like, we don't have to wait for the governments. And in fact, we also can't make the progress we need to make from government alone. So it will take essentially collective leadership. It will take us thinking through, how do we enlist many, many more of the most passionate advocates in the world to put their energy in marginalized communities into ensuring that all kids have the kind of education necessary to ultimately shape a better future for themselves, for their families, for their communities, for their countries, for our global society. So it's an honor to be part of such an inspired group of people, and I hope that this energy from this panel infuses itself in the world, and that we see just a different level of priority put on essentially the right to education.
Thank you, Wendy. So clearly some powerful themes emerging here: the power of community, the importance of community, and indeed the politicization of education. Shantha, you've dealt with both of these.
I thought I would go into what happened during COVID and post-COVID. I think it gives a very clear indication of what schools are for children. One thing we all know is school is for education. But then during COVID, we got to know that school is for friendship. School is for a routine and a habit of packing a school bag. School is for health. School is for a noon meal program. School is for having a mentor and a teacher. The school is a safe place for children to be in. So in a way, COVID enlarged to us how important that institution was for children, you know, and how much children missed it. And in fact, during COVID, when there was no livelihood, you had boys and girls again going back to work. They came to school with a lot of difficulty, but there was no income, there was no employment. State security was not working, so they had to work. So in a way, it pushed many, many children out of school. So in a way, schools are the best place for a child to be in. And there is no other way in which one can protect the child. During the COVID, of course, they didn't learn. There was a learning loss, and there was this farce of internet teaching. All of you know that there is no electricity, there is no mobile phones for most of the children. So it was only on paper that there was some internet learning, but that just didn't work. After schools reopened, as I mentioned to you, girls were the first ones who wanted to escape home and get back to school. What happened for boys was that they got so much out of the habit of education that they also went into bad sites, pornography on the WhatsApp, which they shared. Then they also, of course, worked on construction sites and many other places. Many of them became not just alcoholic, but drug addicts. And when we did ask them, why don't you go to school? They said that, look, we have learned, we've lost everything, we don't remember anything, and they want to go to school, but the teachers don't respect them because they have learned nothing, and teachers are not ready to teach them, so they may as well drop out of school. But if you talk to the girls, it was entirely a different story. It's the same thing. There was a loss of education, but they said that if we didn't go to school, then our future is going to be one of domestic violence, abuse. So the gender issue was so prominent that the girls were determined to go to school no matter what, but the boys slipped out of school, and that seems to be a great worry for us on how to get the boys back and restore their confidence to get back into school. I do not know if this is happening in other countries, but the boys really have lost it during COVID. Not that the girls were better, but the girls have learned to demand for cycles. They have learned to demand for the bus fare and for free buses. The government has done pretty nothing. They have not recognized the learning loss that has happened. There is no special education for children who have learning loss. In fact, the investments have come down. Many schools have crumbled because there was no maintenance and they're full of cobwebs. Community has cleared many schools, but then the schools have to come back. There is no water, there is no toilet. So there is indeed a learning loss and also a loss of infrastructure, both physical and teachers also. One should sympathize with them that they were not given the confidence to get back to school, back into a routine of teaching. So there is, even after 3 years of COVID, there is a huge education emergency, I would think, in India. And there is a falsification of data. Everything is computerized now. So the names are already in the computer that these are the children who are attending schools. But in reality, they're not there. So the government pretends that children are in school when the names are in the attendance register. But when you do a physical head count, if there are 50 names in the attendance register, only 20 of them are in school, 30 have disappeared. So I would think that the centralized, computerized data is to me a terrorism against children. I call it a data terror. The other thing that has happened is the taking over the space of technology has taken over, software has taken over teachers' autonomy and teachers' way of thinking and dealing with every child. Even the government wants reports on how many lessons did you teach, what were the exam questions, did it learn, how many children have learned to speak, learned to observe, learned to play. So half of the time of the teacher is spent on filling up of forms. You know, it's totally centralized. And this entire software industry has taken over the education department. And even the education department assesses a school on the nature of how teachers fill in the forms and enter the data. So in a way you find, I do not know if it is happening in other countries, but in India especially, the reporting is on data and totally, trivializing the role of the teacher. Teacher is not an intellectual, teacher does not think. There are these young professionals who have come from many of these corporate sectors who give advices to the government on how to teach, and that is what is happening in India. And I would think that it has totally undermined the education system. There is a crisis. There should be a total shutdown of software and computers, I think, in the education program till there is equity, till there is quality, and then this should supplement or complement what is happening rather than substitute for everything in the system.
Thank you.
This is what I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm getting signs in the back that we're running out of time, but I really want to hear from you again. In particular, do you have a perspective on the impact of COVID on education in this country, and indeed whether there might be, in an effort to end on a positive note, that we've learned some things through COVID, ways of using technology to advance or minimize or undermine education, while taking Shantha's view into account, of course.
Thank you, Louise. To give optimism, and I think you have given us all great optimism, as have all of us. But UCLA is the home of the late, great Ralph Bunche. He was a diplomat at the United Nations as a Black American when America was still very segregated, and he faced untold discrimination here at home, and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1951. He says, "I'm an incurable optimist." And I think for any of us who have seen dark times, hope is the only choice. If you give up on that, then you've not even gotten started. And I think that coming out of COVID, which affected everyone, everywhere, we have learned that whatever else we are human, and we need humanity, and we need one another. And I think that is the great lesson our children have shown us. It is not about the math. It is not about what they're learning or the data. It is about being with one another and learning to be human.
Thank you. That's a wonderful note on which to end. I'm sorry that we haven't had more time for engaging with you, and I'm sure the panelists will agree to stand around and chat one-on-one, but I think they need to move another group into this hall. So thank you for your patience, and please join me in thanking our fabulous panelists.